In the morning, Thomas's mother woke him up earlier than usual. Thursdays were her busiest days, with twice the normal number of houses to clean. This meant that she had to get Thomas to the daycare almost an hour and a half earlier. "Come on, sleepyhead. You can go back to sleep in the car on the way." Ms. Geraldi was rushed, and her son's resistance to conscientiousness wasn't helping at all. "If you don't hurry up and get dressed right now, mister, then you can kiss your freedom goodbye. You will be grounded this weekend." "Yes, Thomas groaned. Thursdays sucked. The ride to daycare was nothing but a blur of buckling a seat belt, laying the seat back, and then the stop in front of the center, where Thomas was shaken awake again by his mother. "Come on, Judith didn't agree to meet us early just so you can sleep in the car. Besides, I don't think my clients would appreciate you running around their houses all day." Thomas stumbled out of the car, his pack held loosely in hand. Ms. Kenner and his mom exchanged some brief niceties, the usual thanks and "you're welcome, it's no problem, but it's so early, blah blah." Ms. Kenner then took Thomas by the hand and led him inside while still half-dazed from his inability to be fully awake. "Well, it seems someone is still a little sleepy this morning, huh? Ms. Kenner, master observationist, why don't you just go lie down in the nap room until you feel like joining the rest of the world, okay?" Thomas yawned, in absolutely no position to argue. So he proceeded hand in hand with Ms. Kenner to the nap room, laid down on his kinder mat, and was soon fast asleep again. Ms. Kenner closed the door as she left, so as to not wake the very tired little boy. It did not, however, escape her how cute Tommy was when he was sleeping. A few hours later, Thomas woke up. For a second he lay on his mat letting his eye adjust to the semi-dark room. "That's right," he said to himself, "I was sleeping in the nap room." As he finished his thought, the door to the room opened suddenly, letting bright light pour into the room. Thomas squinted, his eyes having a time trying to adjust to the sudden intrusion. "I see you're finally awake," came Pammy's sweet sing-song voice from the light. "Well, you certainly were tired." "Yeah, I guess. Can I go to the bathroom?" Nature had to be answered. "Yeah, sure, kid. Come on. Then you can go play with the other children, okay?" Pammy led Thomas to the bathroom, waited for him to finish, and then accompanied him to the playroom. Today's play scheduled consisted mostly of reading comics he had borrowed the day before from his friends. Interesting stuff really, what with all the happenings in the lives of superheroes. Of course, it was all pretty tame reading. His mom didn't want them to read anything too violent or overly mature. Just some fun-filled frolics in the form of Dork Towers, Hero Bear, and the slyly disguised copy of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, #1. Kids need standards after all. Lunchtime. Ms. Rouse called into the room. The children that were old enough to understand immediately headed towards the door. The others were helped along by the Aiden dance. After all the babies were seated in theater-high chairs across the hall, and the other kids were happily digging into their assorted collection of sandwiches and soups, Thomas sat down and began his own lunch. This day's menu was comprised of a PB&J sandwich, yet another grape juice box, an apple, and one small brownie. "All right everyone," began Ms. Kenner, "let's get you all cleaned up, changed, and then it's nap time." "Ah, but I'm not even near tired." Thomas whined. "Come on Tommy," Pammy took over, "you have to be a role model for the other children. If they see that you aren't having to take a nap, then they'll all want to get up and play." Good points, but made more for the sake of the women, who just so happened to regard nap time as their own rest time, than for the sake of having a good role model. "Do I have to?" He was right before the really good part of his latest comic acquisition. "Yes," came the stern reply from Ms. Rouse, "no more discussion. Remember, Thomas, we have rules and you are expected to follow them." Thomas winced. Stupid rules. He was older than these little brats, so why did he have to take a nap? It just wasn't fair. But fairness aside, he was escorted to the nap room for a second time. Laying on his mat, not even the soft music flowing into the room was enough to calm him down today. He was forming an idea. Thomas lay silently, pretending to go along with this forced napping, but he was secretly waiting for his chance. He had managed to get his backpack into the nap room after lunch by simply wearing it during lunch. Now it lay only scant feet away near the door. Thomas looked over at the three ladies in their comfortable chairs, seemingly absorbed in their own readings. Thomas made his move. He started by slowly rolling to the side, closer to the line of cribs against the closest wall, which effectively obscured him from the view of Ms. Rouse and Pammy. Ms. Kenner was still reading as Thomas slowly inched his way along the floor, staying close to the legs of the cribs, approaching his goal. When he finally got to his pack, he was forced to look away from Ms. Kenner in order to open the sack and remove his prize. Halfway through the unzipping, disaster struck. "Thomas Geraldi, what on earth do you think you are doing?" Ms. Kenner had caught him. Being caught had a way of taking any thoughts out completely out of his head. "Well, it seems you've disobeyed the nap rule." Ms. Kenner seemed disappointed. Well, mister, you do know what this means, don't you? I'm gonna be punished. Thomas couldn't look at the woman. That's right. You are. Ms. Kenner took his hand and led him towards the door. He was gonna get spanked, or worse. Could call his mom. That would mean an instant grounding. Since we don't have your parents' permission to spank you, she began. Awesome. No spanking. But that meant grounding. Oh, the humanity. And we don't want to disturb your mother at work, what? No call to mom. What kind of hideous, heinous, cruel, and unusual punishment could these witches have in store? But we here at Famer and the Dale believe that the punishment should be befitting of the crime. What could this mean? Were they gonna put him to sleep? Take away his comics? Tie him to the floor? Well, none of these actually. Since, little man, you can't seem to stay still at nap time sleeping on the floor, then from now on, either at nap time or any time you are asleep here, you will. What? The agony of suspense. Thomas thought he was about to burst. You will be sleeping in a crib, just like the other children here. Stunned silence. Thomas was shocked. Of course he didn't want to have to sleep in a crib. He was 8 for the love of God. On the other hand, the fear of what might happen to him if he didn't cooperate. Slowly, he shook his head in reluctant agreement to the punishment. Well then, don't think that you're gonna get off this easily. What now? In addition to what we do here, your mother will hear about this. No. Thomas was stunned, but relieved that he wasn't gonna get a spanking or anything that would hurt. Besides, the only other people here were all too young to be able to tell anyone about his shame. Ms. Kenner took Thomas's hand and led him to one of the large cribs at the end of the room, the ones that had caught his attention the day before. The rail was lowered, the sheets turned back, and Thomas Geraldi's fate was sealed. Ms. Kenner, belying her appearance, picked Tommy up and lay him down in the crib. Now maybe you can learn how to stay down during nap time. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. It couldn't hurt. Too late, kiddo. This will be your crib from now on. Whenever you sleep here. She noticed a somewhat worried look on the child's face. Don't worry, noon outside of this daycare, except your mother of course, will ever know about this. Thomas blushed. Despite Ms. Kenner's reassurance, he was still highly embarrassed. Here he was, 8 years old, and forced to sleep in a crib. All he could think about though, was that it was his own fault. If only he hadn't tried to sneak a comic. Thomas closed his eyes and tried to block out the fact that he was laying in a large crib, but the sound of the bars being lifted back into full and upright positions didn't help very much. On the plus side, the mattress was a lot more comfortable than the half-inch of foam packed inside his kinder mat. Due partly to his now much subdued attitude, the comfortable bedding, and the soft music, Thomas did eventually fall asleep. Upon waking, Thomas stared up at the ceiling, the bars of his sleeping prison towering above him. He decided it was time to get out, the legal way. As Thomas stood up, however, he realized that getting out of the crib on his own was going to be a challenge. The rails came up to just below his shoulders, preventing him from just simply climbing over them. The mechanism to lower the bars was located on the bottom of the rails, which due to the thick bumper pad, was perpetually out of reach. Oh, Thomas, I didn't notice you were up. Pammy approached the crib containing the now conscious and slightly embarrassed Thomas Geraldi. Can I get out now? He asked. He had to go to the bathroom. Well, seeing as how you only have to be in the crib while you're asleep, and you are not asleep now, then I'll say yes. Her cheeriness was definitely infectious. As soon as the rails were lowered, and he was lifted to freedom, Thomas started to feel better. Thanks ma'am, but I really need to pee. The truth is always the best policy. Okay, let's go then, most of the kids are already outside, so you can join them when you're through, okay? Pammy watched from the nap room doorway as Thomas went down the hall to the bathroom, waited for him to come out, and walked with him to the outside door. I've gotta go watch the few children who are still asleep. Play nice now. As Pammy turned back inside, Thomas noticed that his backpack had been moved outside before he himself had. Awesome. Soon, the problems in his Sand City, what with all the car chases and fires to put out, made him completely forget his nap time ordeal. His fun continued until well past the other children had been picked up. Thomas, Ms. Rouse called, your mother's here. Coming. Thomas packed his things and headed towards the door. As he entered the main receiving area, he walked into a half-finished conversation between Ms. Kenner and his mom. Well Judith, I trust your judgment and I totally agree with your course of action. Well that's good. Ms. Kenner smiled, I know it must be embarrassing, but we do have to keep order around here. Thank you for your support of our decision. Don't worry, he'll learn his lesson. It was then that Miss Geraldi noticed Thomas. Hey there honey, how was your day? All right. About the same. His voice trailed off as he remembered nap time. Let's go, I think we have some things to talk about. Thomas's mom seemed slightly upset, But not so much so. Thomas spent the rest of that evening in his room, except for dinner. His mom wasn't that mad, but she did think that he needed to be punished at home to reinforce what the ladies at the daycare center had done. But one thing kept nagging at the back of her mind. During their conversation at the center, Judith had mentioned what a sweet little angel Tommy had looked like sleeping in his crib. She thought, if only I had been able to spend more time with him when he was younger.